By 1960, the woman who had helped name the Slinky was left to rescue it after her husband walked away from his family and struggling company to join a religious cult in Bolivia. The story of the Slinky is often told as a bright piece of American toy history, a simple spring that could seem almost alive as it walked down steps. But the most dramatic part of that story begins at its lowest point. In 1960, Richard James left his family and his struggling business to join a religious cult in Bolivia. What he left behind was not just a famous novelty toy. He left a company near bankruptcy, a family in crisis, and a future that suddenly depended on Betty James. The same woman who had helped shape the identity of the toy now had to decide whether its story would end there. The question was brutal in its simplicity. Could a company built around a coiled spring survive the collapse of the life around it? Part 1. The Accidental Spring. To understand what Betty James had to save, you have to go back to 1943. Richard James was a naval engineer trying to design a tension spring that could stabilize maritime instruments on naval ships. According to American experience, that was the context of the invention. Not a toy workshop, not a children's product line, but a technical attempt to improve shipboard instruments. In that setting, Richard James invented what became the Slinky. The leap from military engineering to household novelty is part of what makes the object so memorable. A spring meant to solve one problem revealed a completely different kind of appeal. It moved with a strange grace, compressing and extending in a way that looked playful, almost theatrical. But even an invention with movement needs an identity. That part came from Betty James. The Lemelson MIT source notes that Betty found the word slinky in a dictionary and decided it accurately described the spring's movement. That naming mattered. Without changing the object itself, she gave it a personality the public could instantly understand. Before there was a business crisis, before there was a recovery, there was a married pair translating an engineering accident into something people could desire. And that raises the next question. Part 2, 90 Minutes in Philadelphia. Once they had the object and the name, how would anyone know it was worth buying? The answer arrived in a department store. In 1945, at Gimbels department store in Philadelphia, Richard and Betty James staged an initial demonstration of the Slinky. It was a test not just of a toy, but of whether movement alone could sell an idea. The result was immediate. According to the company history source, the couple sold their entire stock of 400 Slinkies in 90 minutes. That number tells you almost everything about the product's first contact with the public. People did not need a complicated explanation. They saw the motion, and they wanted to take it home. The success of that demonstration established the Slinky as more than an amusing accident. It was now a commercial hit with proof behind it. The speed of those sales suggests another truth as well. The appeal was unusually broad. A spring by itself sounds almost too simple to become a phenomenon. Yet that simplicity may have been the advantage. There were no elaborate rules to learn, no special setup required to grasp the wonder of it. The object performed its own case for existence. For the Jameses, that first triumph must have looked like the beginning of a durable empire. But success in a store is one thing. Sustaining a company over time is another. And the brighter the early rise, the harder the fall can feel when the business behind it begins to crack. Part 3, the collapse behind the hit. By 1960, the image of the Slinky as a buoyant success collided with a much harsher reality. Richard James left his family and his struggling business to join a religious cult in Bolivia. That fact, documented by encyclopedia.com, is the pivot on which the entire later history turns. The departure was personal and commercial at the same time. A husband left, a father left, and the man associated with the invention of the Slinky also walked away from the company built around it. What remained was a business in severe trouble. YY describes Betty James taking over as CEO of a near-bankrupt company and facing the work of paying off all the business debts. The contrast is stark. The toy still carried public recognition, but recognition does not erase creditors or stabilize a factory. A famous product can still belong to a failing company. This is where the story stops being about the charm of an invention and becomes a story about endurance under pressure. Betty James was not stepping into a thriving enterprise polished for a smooth succession. She was stepping into a crisis. The challenge was not to slightly improve a popular brand. It was to keep it alive at all. And if she was going to do that, she needed more than sentiment about the toy's past. She needed a practical path through debt. Part 4, Betty takes the company. Geography and public attention. Betty James became the person who would attempt that rescue. Y reports that after taking over as CEO, she relocated the factory to Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, and managed to pay off all the business debts. In one verified line, you can hear how large the task was. A near-bankrupt company does not recover through image alone. It recovers through decisions. Moving a factory is one of those decisions that signals a full assumption of control. It means the rescue was not symbolic. Betty James was reorganizing the physical center of the company while trying to stabilize its finances. That combination matters because it shows the recovery was both structural and financial. She was not merely preserving a legacy, she was rebuilding an operating business. There is a tendency in invention stories to treat the inventor as the whole drama and everyone else as supporting cast. The Slinky story does not fit that pattern. Richard James invented the spring in 1943. That is a verified fact and central to the product's origin. But the survival of the company belongs just as clearly to Betty James's leadership in the years after 1960. A fair telling requires both truths at once. The object came from one part of the partnership, and its rescue came from the other. Once the debts were being confronted and the factory had been moved, another problem remained. How do you make the public feel the magic of an old toy again? Betty James's answer was not only financial management, it was marketing powerful enough to renew the toy's place in American culture. Time reports that under her leadership, the company popularized the Slinky with a highly successful television commercial and catchy jingle that debuted in 1962. That detail is easy to underestimate until you remember the timing. Just 2 years earlier, Richard James had left his family and the struggling business for Bolivia. By 1962, the company was not simply surviving in private. It was speaking to the public in a fresh, memorable voice. The famous jingle became a new kind of motion for the Slinky. The spring moved downstairs. The commercial moved through living rooms. It translated the toy's appeal into television language, short, repeatable, unforgettable. This was more than promotion. It was a statement that the company was still here. The product had not been buried with the business crisis. It had been repositioned for another era of attention. That matters because recoveries are rarely complete when they stay hidden inside ledgers and factories. People have to see the comeback. They have to hear it. The 1962 commercial did that. It helped transform a rescued company into a revived cultural presence. And it opened the final chapter of the story. Not just survival after collapse, but a long stewardship that changed how the Slinky's history would be remembered. Part 5. Who Saved the Slinky? When people look back at the Slinky, the simplest version of the story is still the easiest to tell. An engineer invents a toy spring, and the toy becomes a hit. That version is true, but incomplete. The fuller story begins with Richard James inventing the Slinky in 1943 while working on a tension spring for maritime instruments on naval ships. It continues with Betty James naming it after a dictionary word that captured its movement. It rises with the 1945 Gimbels demonstration, when 400 Slinkies sold in 90 minutes. Then it breaks sharply in 1960, when Richard James left his family and his struggling business to join a religious cult in Bolivia. At that point, the future of the Slinky no longer depended on the accident that created it. It depended on the person willing to carry it forward. Betty James took over the near-bankrupt company, moved the factory to Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, paid off the business debts, and led the effort that popularized the toy again through the 1962 television commercial and jingle. In other words, the Slinky has two origin stories. One is the invention of the object. The other is the rescue of the company. The first is impossible without Richard James. The second is impossible without Betty James. And if the measure of a legacy is what survives a collapse, then the continuing life of the Slinky says as much about her leadership as it does about the spring itself. What endures is not just a toy walking downstairs. It is the record of a business that nearly fell apart, and of the woman who kept it moving. If this story touches on family abandonment, coercive groups, or financial crisis in a painful way, consider reaching out to trusted local support services, a licensed mental health professional, or crisis resources in your area.